The chain hit the dirt road before Clyde Crawford had even fully registered what was happening. He had been kneeling beside a downed pilgrim, a heavy-set merchant whose left leg had taken a crossbow bolt somewhere between the 4th and 5th shrines along the Verath road, pressing a folded compress against the wound, and barking for his kit when the procession of armored men came around the bend. 6 of them, wearing the yellow and black sash of Lord Fenwick's border garrison. And between them, bound at the wrists by a length of iron chain, walked the most striking creature Clyde had ever laid eyes on. She was tall a full head above the tallest garrison man, with the broad-shouldered frame of someone who had hauled stone and swung steel since she was old enough to stand. Her skin was a deep, burnished olive green, the kind of color that reminded Clyde of old moss in summer light, and her tusks curved upward from her lower jaw in 2 clean arcs, polished and unblemished. She wore fitted warrior's leathers, a dark, wine-red vest laced tight across her chest, bracers of hardened hide buckled over her forearms, and snug traveling trousers the color of charcoal, tucked into calf-high boots that had seen serious road. Every line of her outfit said capable, said moving, said do not mistake me for cargo. The chain said something different. Clyde saw the moment she noticed the chain had gone slack where one garrison soldier had dropped his grip to scratch under his helmet. She did not lunge. She simply lifted her bound hands and looked at the links with the focused, clinical disgust of a woman measuring exactly how long it would take to become a problem. Then she looked up and her eyes amber bright, burning with a quiet and absolute fury, swept the road and landed briefly on Clyde. He looked back at her. He did not look away. "Move along, surgeon," said the garrison captain, a stocky man with a scar along one jaw who went by the name Hurst. Clyde knew Hurst. Hurst had once paid him 3 copper to remove a boot nail from his heel and had complained the whole time. "Garrison business. The orc is a prisoner under Lord Fenwick's warrant." "What warrant?" Clyde asked, because he had a habit of asking questions when the answers seemed important. "Does not concern you." The orc woman said very clearly in a voice that carried like iron on stone. "He said the chain would be ceremonial, a formality for the crossing." He lied. Hurst did not look at her. He spoke to Clyde instead. "She entered the Fenwick crossing without a transit pass. Orc law, human law makes no difference. She is being escorted to the garrison post at Red Hill Way House." Clyde knew Red Hill Way House. He had spent 3 weeks there the previous winter treating soldiers for frostbite and a particularly nasty strain of swamp fever. He knew the cell block behind the Way House stable. He knew what happened to orcs who got put in those cells, and he knew that none of them had ever been there for paperwork reasons alone. The orc woman pulled the chain taut. Not enough to break it, not yet, but enough that every one of the 6 garrison men felt it and straightened up. "I told them," she said, still looking at Clyde rather than at the men who held her, "that I would break any chain they put on me. They did not believe me." "She's strong," one of the garrison men muttered, "but not that strong." Clyde stood up from beside the wounded merchant, who had gone pale and silent and was watching the scene with the stunned look of a man who had decided to be invisible. Clyde wiped his hands on his field cloth, tucked his compress back into his kit, and settled his pack on his shoulder. "What is her name?" he asked. Hurst blinked. "What? Her name? If she is a prisoner under warrant, there is a name on the warrant." A long pause. Hurst said, with some reluctance, "Ugak Ironblood." Clyde had heard that name once, in a Wayhouse bar on the eastern stretch of the Verath road, from a soldier who had been drinking harder than was wise and speaking louder than was smart. He had said it like it was a curse word and a prayer at the same time. He had said Ugak Ironblood had held the pass at Grafin alone for 3 hours while the human and orc delegation evacuated. He had said she was the war leader's own blood, the last living member of the Ironblood line, and that she had laid down her weapons only when the treaty was signed and not one moment before. Clyde looked at the woman in the chains. She looked back at him with those burning amber eyes, and she said nothing, which he understood to mean that she was watching to see what he would do. He said, "I am traveling to Red Hill Way House anyway. I am the road surgeon for the Verath pilgrim route. I will accompany the prisoner and vouch for her continued good behavior at the Wayhouse gates." Hurst stared at him. "You are a pill mixer. You have no authority." "I have a signed contract from the Verath Road Pilgrimage Commission," Clyde said, which was true. "And that contract gives me freedom of movement and right of consultation along all Wayhouse posts between the first and final shrine." He let that sit for a moment. "I am not challenging your warrant. I am offering to walk alongside your prisoner. That seems like it would make your job easier." Hurst thought about it the way men think about things they know are wrong but cannot immediately articulate why. Then he shrugged. "Walk behind the column." Clyde shouldered his kit and fell into step. Ugak Ironblood, walking with her wrists bound in front of her and 6 garrison men arranged around her like a bad joke, turned her head and looked at him over her shoulder as he came up to the edge of the column. She looked at him the way you look at someone who has just done something either very brave or very stupid, and you have not yet decided which. She said very quietly so only he could hear, "I told you I would break any chain they put on me." He said just as quietly, "I know. I was hoping to make sure you did not have to." She held his gaze for 3 full seconds. Then she faced forward again, and something in the line of her shoulders changed, not softened exactly, but adjusted, the way a blade shifts in its grip when the hand holding it decides it is not alone. They walked. The Verath Road was, on a good day, a churned mud track wide enough for 2 wagons that wound for 40 miles between the human settlement of Pharaoh's Crossing and the border Wayhouse at Redhill. On a bad day, it was a churned mud track with bandits. On this particular afternoon, it was a churned mud track with garrison soldiers, a chained orc war leader, a wounded merchant who had been helped onto a pilgrim cart and was now being nursed along 300 yards behind them, and Clyde Crawford, who was trying to think very carefully and not show it. He had supplies for 2 weeks, a kit that could handle most field injuries short of major abdominal work, a letter of commission that was technically valid, and approximately no plan beyond getting to Redhill and figuring out what came next when he arrived. He had been traveling the Verath Road for 4 years. He had seen pilgrims, merchants, preachers, soldiers, orc traders, and once a pair of river bears that had wandered down from the high country and terrorized a shrine camp for 6 days. He had stitched wounds and set bones and pulled teeth and delivered fevers through their worst nights. He had never seen anything that looked like Ugak Ironblood walking in chains on a road that had no good reason to hold her. He pulled up alongside her as the column stretched out. Hurst was at the front talking to one of his men. The rearmost soldier was watching the back trail. Clyde walked close enough to speak without raising his voice. "How many days has it been?" he asked. She glanced at him. 3. "They took me at the Greymount Crossing when I crossed without presenting transit papers. I did not know transit papers had been reinstated. The peace treaty suspended them for 6 years. They were reinstated 4 months ago," Clyde said. "Lord Fenwick's order. It did not get much distribution on the orc side of the border." "No," she said. "It did not." She looked ahead. Convenient. He thought that was a very precise word for someone who had been walking chained for 3 days. "Where were you going?" "The shrine at Asheville, 20 miles past Redhill." A pause. "My mother walked that road before the last war. She never reached the final shrine. I intended to complete it." Clyde had treated pilgrims from every part of the known territory, human and orc alike, and he knew that the Verath Road shrines were one of the few things in the world that both races treated as sacred. The pilgrimage was older than the wars, older than the treaties, older than the border posts. You did not interfere with it. You were not supposed to, he said. "A pilgrimage. They arrested you on a pilgrimage." "Yes. Hurst knows that." Hurst did not ask. She rolled her shoulders and the chain clinked. He saw an orc without papers at a border crossing and he saw an opportunity. An opportunity for what? She looked at him again, and this time the amber eyes held something colder. "You know Lord Fenwick's name. Do you know his politics?" Clyde thought about the Wayhouse gossip, the garrison talk, the whispered things he had heard from merchants who traded across the border and had opinions about the new border tariffs and the garrison expansions, and the fact that 3 orc settlement camps in the Greymont Valley had been relocated in the last year under compulsory order. He said, "I know enough." Then you know that an Ironblood in his cell block is more than a paperwork problem. There is a reason the Ironblood name still carries weight. My grandfather signed the first peace accord. My mother held the Grafin Pass. She looked forward again. I am the last of that line. A warrant signed by Fenwick's garrison gets me off the road and into a cell, and whatever happens after that happens quietly. The weight of what she was saying settled on Clyde like cold water. He had thought this was a bad situation. He was now understanding it was a much more specific kind of bad. He said, "We have about 12 miles to Red Hill. That is enough time to think," she said. "I have been thinking for 3 days. Have you come up with anything?" A very slight pause. The chain clinked once. I had planned to simply break the chain at the Wayhouse gate and trust to my legs and the darkness. That would get you shot, possibly, but I would be free. He looked at her profile, the clean line of her jaw, the set of her mouth, the absolute steadiness of her expression. She was not afraid, she was not desperate, she was doing what she had clearly always done, calculating the cost of freedom and deciding it was worth whatever it came to. He said, "There might be a better way." She did not answer immediately. Then she said, "You are a road surgeon. What is the better way?" "I have the Wayhouse commander's contract, Commander Breck. He is an old man with bad kidneys who I have treated 3 times, and he owes me more than he likes to admit. I have a letter of commission from the Pilgrimage Commission. And I have the knowledge that Fenwick's warrant, if it was issued for failure to present transit papers, carries a fixed fee of 4 silver for first offenders with no prior record." She turned to look at him fully. "You know the garrison law." "I know the fee schedule," he said. "I know it because I once had to pay it for an orc trader who got caught on the wrong side of a crossing without his papers and could not afford the fine. The garrison would rather have the money than the prisoner as long as they have someone to file the paperwork." A very long pause. She said, "4 silver," he said. "I have 6. She stared at him. He looked back at her. He was aware that this was not the most dramatic offer he could have made a plain man with a surgeon's kit and a purse full of hard-earned silver, walking alongside a war leader in iron chains, and suggesting that accounting might be the path to freedom. It was not the kind of thing that ended up in battle songs. She said, "Why?" he said. "Because you did not do anything wrong, and because Fenwick's politics do not belong on the Verath road, and because," he stopped. Then he said honestly, "Because you looked at me like you were deciding whether to trust me, and I would rather be trustworthy than let that look be wrong." Ugak Ironblood looked at him for a long moment. Then she faced forward, and the hard line of her mouth shifted just slightly into something that was not quite a smile but was perhaps the neighborhood of one. She said, "If the commander accepts the fine, I will owe you 4 silver. "You do not owe me anything," Clyde said. "But if you want to pay me back, you could walk with me to Asheville. I could use someone who knows the road." She said nothing for a long moment. Then, "The road from Red Hill to Asheville passes through the Hollow Mile. It is bandit country." "I know," Clyde said. "I was robbed there last spring. And you are proposing to walk it again." "I am proposing to walk it with better company." This time, the line of her mouth did become something. It was brief and controlled, and she clearly did not want it to show. But it showed. They walked the remaining 12 miles to Red Hill Wayhouse in the long amber light of the afternoon, and twice Hurst looked back at them with the expression of a man who knew something was happening but could not identify what. The other garrison men talked among themselves. The wounded merchant's cart creaked along 300 yards back. The road ran between old stone shrines draped in faded pilgrim ribbons, and the shadows of the carved figures stretched long across the mud. And Ugak Ironblood walked in chains with her head up and her eyes forward. And Clyde Crawford walked beside her, and did not pretend she was anything other than exactly what she was. Commander Breck was a small, iron-haired man with the careful eyes of someone who had learned long ago to assess situations quickly and file the most useful paperwork. He received Clyde at the Wayhouse gate with the mild surprise of a man who had been expecting routine and received complication. Clyde laid out the situation with the precise, unhurried language he used when explaining a difficult diagnosis. He presented his commission letter. He presented the fee schedule clause, which he had looked up in his kit pack's reference folio during one of the march's rest stops. He presented 6 silver, which was 2 more than required, and said the extra 2 were a donation to the Wayhouse's medical supply fund, which Breck had been trying to expand for 2 years. Breck looked at the 6 silver. He looked at the papers. He looked at Ugak Ironblood, who was standing in the Wayhouse courtyard with the chain still on and watching the proceedings with the careful attention of someone who had learned not to celebrate until the gate was open. Breck said to Hurst, "The warrant specifies fine eligible offense, first occurrence. Is there a prior record?" Hurst said through his teeth, "No." "Then the fee schedule applies." Breck signed the release form. He said to his gate sergeant, "Remove the restraints." The key turned. The chain came off. Ugak Ironblood stood in the Wayhouse courtyard with her wrists free and rolled them once, slowly, feeling the return of full circulation. Then she looked at Clyde, and it was a look that had too many things in it to name neatly. Gratitude, yes, but also something more complicated, something that said this matters and I will not forget it, and I am not certain what to do with a man like you. Hurst came to stand in front of Clyde with the expression of someone who had just lost something he'd been looking forward to. "You made an enemy today," he said, quietly enough that it was meant to be personal. Clyde said, "I have made enemies before. I am still here." Hurst looked at Ugak. Then he looked back at Clyde. Then he walked away. Clyde let out a breath he had been holding since the first shrine. Ugak said from behind him, "I will not forget this." He turned. She was watching him with those amber eyes, steady and burning at once, and the courtyard torches were just beginning to light as the last of the daylight let go. And she was tall and strong and fierce and standing free, and he thought with a clarity that surprised him that he was very glad she was free. He said, "I have a room booked here for the night. 2-bed traveler's room. You can have one of them." "The road to Asheville is better started fresh," she said. "You still want to go to Asheville?" "I have a patient at the shrine encampment there," he said, "an old priest with a chest infection. I told him I would be there by week's end." He paused. "And you have a pilgrimage to finish." She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "Yes, I do." The Wayhouse room was narrow and smelled of old tallow and pine resin, with 2 straw-and-rope bunks on opposite walls and a single shuttered window. Clyde set his kit on the floor and took the bunk closer to the door without asking, because it seemed like the right thing to do, and Ugak took the other and sat on it and unlaced her bracers in the flickering candlelight. He said from across the room, not looking up from the folio he was reviewing, "Your wrists, do they need looking at? 3 days in garrison chain can cause." "They are fine," she said. He nodded and kept reading. After a moment she said, "You did not ask about the Ironblood name." "I knew it already." "What did you know?" He turned the folio page. "Grafen Pass, 3 hours, you held it alone." She was quiet. Then she said, "Most humans who know that story do not tell it the same way." "How do they tell it?" "They say an orc raider held the pass. They do not say it was to protect the delegation. They do not say it was the peace delegation." He looked up from his folio. She was sitting with her bracers in her hands, not looking at him, the candlelight moving across the hard planes of her face. She looked like someone who had decided long ago that the truth would not be told correctly and had stopped expecting it to be. He said, "I heard it from a man who was in the delegation, a field surgeon, old friend of mine, trained me for 2 years. He said the orc who held that pass was the reason 34 people, human and orc, walked out of Grafen alive. He said he did not know her name and he was sorry for that." Ugak looked at him. Her expression was unreadable for a moment, and then it was something raw and real and quickly covered. She said, "He is the first man to say that." "He was an honest man," Clyde said. "He died last year, fever on the Eastern Road. I was with him." A pause. She said quietly, "I am sorry." "So was I." He went back to his folio. "Get some sleep." The hollow mile starts 2 hours past Red Hill at a good walking pace, and you want to go through it in daylight. She lay down on the bunk. He listened to the way house settle around them. The distant clank of the stable, the murmur of voices in the common room below, the wind against the shutter, and tried not to think too hard about the fact that Ugak Ironblood was in the same room as him, 4 feet away, and that the day had happened the way it had. He blew out the candle and lay in the dark and thought about Hurst's face and about Fenwick's politics and about the hollow mile and about a woman who had said she would break any chain they put on her. She had not needed to, but she had known when he said there was another way that the offer was real. She had trusted it. That felt like something. He was not sure yet what. He slept. In the morning she was already up when he woke, standing at the window with the shutter cracked, watching the courtyard below with the alert stillness of someone who slept lightly and woke ready. She had relaced her bracers, and her traveling leathers were straight. The morning light caught the curve of her tusks and the sharp line of her cheekbones, and Clyde thought before he was fully awake that she was extraordinary looking. He said, "Good morning," she said without turning. Hurst left before dawn with 4 of his men. He left 2 behind. Clyde sat up. Left for where? East. That is the direction of Fenwick's main garrison post at Thornwall. She closed the shutter. That is also the direction you go if you want to send a faster rider ahead to Red Hill's Eastern Gate checkpoint, which covers the Asheville Road. He was fully awake now. He is going to try to intercept us. He is going to try to get a new warrant, she corrected. With more specific charges, once he reaches Thornwall and speaks to whoever Fenwick has stationed there. She turned from the window. We have perhaps half a day before that becomes a problem. Clyde was already on his feet, packing his kit with the practiced speed of someone who had made fast departures before. Then we move now. They were out of the way house before the morning meal, on the road with their packs in the gray pre-dawn light, moving fast. Ugak set the pace, long, ground-eating strides that forced Clyde to extend his own considerably. And he kept up without complaint, because he had been walking the Verath road for 4 years, and his legs knew what they were doing. The road east of Red Hill changed character quickly. The maintained cobble gave way to packed earth, which gave way to a narrower track hedged by old-growth oak and thornbrake. The shrine markers appeared every half-mile, worn stone figures with hollow eyes, draped in faded pilgrim ribbons in the colors of the 6 saints. The road looked peaceful in the early light. Clyde knew better. "The hollow mile," Ugak said, after about an hour's walking. "You said you were robbed here." 3 men. "They wanted my kit, which is understandable. My kit is worth more than most road packs. I gave them the surgical instruments because they were blunt without training, and I gave them a decoy purse I keep for exactly this situation." She glanced at him. "You keep a decoy purse? I have been robbed 4 times in 4 years. You adapt. And the real purse, sewn into the kit lining." She looked at him for a moment with what might have been respect, or might have been amusement, or some combination. "You are more prepared than you look." "That is the nicest thing anyone has said to me in approximately 6 months. She made a sound that was almost, but not quite, a laugh. The ambush came at the 2-mile mark past Red Hill, which was not technically the hollow mile that started at 3, but which was empty of other travelers and thick with the kind of brush that people with bad intentions preferred. 6 men stepped out of the tree line, not garrison, not wearing yellow and black, wearing instead the kind of mixed, scarred gear that said independent contractors who did not mind irregular work. The lead man was large and had a crossbow. He said, "The orc comes with us. The surgeon keeps walking if he is smart about it." Ugak went absolutely still in the way that Clyde had already begun to understand, meant she was about to do something consequential. He stepped forward instead. He said, "Who hired you?" The lead man said. "That is not your concern." Clyde looked at the crossbow. He looked at the other 5 men, 2 of whom had short swords drawn and the rest of whom had the slightly restless energy of men waiting for someone to make the first move. He looked at Ugak, who looked back at him with those amber eyes, measuring, waiting. He said, "That crossbow, if you fire it and miss, takes approximately 30 seconds to reload. In 30 seconds, the woman beside me can cross 30 feet of open ground. That is physics. You can feel free to test it. The lead man said, "We will not miss." "You might not miss me," Clyde said. "But she is already not standing where she was a moment ago." This was true. While he was talking, Ugak had moved 3 steps to the left and slightly forward, placing herself at an angle to the crossbow that made the shooter recalculate his aim. She had done it without sound or signal, and she was now holding a rock the size of a large fist in her right hand with the casual readiness of someone who had done this before. The lead man's eyes tracked to her. He looked uncertain for the first time. Clyde said, "I am the road surgeon for the Verath Commission. My death requires a commission investigation and a garrison inquiry. Hers is covered by the Peace Treaty's Article 9, which classifies unprovoked killing of Orc nationals during pilgrimage as a treaty violation carrying garrison-level jurisdiction." He had no idea if Article 9 said exactly that, but he knew the peace treaty existed, and he knew it had articles, and he said it with the confidence of a man who had spent years telling patients things they needed to believe. "Whoever hired you did not factor that in. I would go back and discuss the fee." A very long silence. Then the lead man lowered the crossbow, and the 2 swords went back to their sheaths, and the 6 men melted back into the tree line with the efficiency of people who had decided that discretion was significantly better than the alternative. Ugak lowered the rock. She looked at it for a moment, then set it down on the road with deliberate care. She looked at Clyde. She said, "Article 9. He said, "I may have improvised the specific language." She was quiet for 2 steps. Then she said, "You stood in front of a crossbow. I stood in front of a man who might use a crossbow. That is different." "How is it different?" "One is certain, one is negotiable." He adjusted his pack strap. "Most things are negotiable if you say them with enough conviction." She walked beside him and said nothing for a while, and he could feel her looking at him from the side, that amber gaze working at him the way it had on the road the day before, measuring, reassessing, turning him over the way you turn a thing over to see all its faces. She said, "You are not what I expected." He said, "What did you expect?" She said, "I did not expect you." He did not know what to say to that. So he just kept walking, and after a moment she walked a little closer, close enough that their arms were nearly touching, and he did not pull away. The hollow mile was clear. They came through it by mid-morning and hit the broader road that ran southeast toward the shrine encampments outside Asheville, and the sky opened up above the tree line, pale winter blue with high thin cloud, and the shrine ribbons in the hedgerows were older here, sun-faded but still moving in the small wind. Ugak stopped at one of them. She reached out and touched a ribbon dark green, the color of the Orc saints, that had been tied to the stone figure's clasped hands. She touched it very lightly with 2 fingers, the way you touch something that has been there longer than you and that you want to acknowledge without disturbing. Clyde stopped a few feet away and did not say anything. She said without turning, "My mother tied one of these, green ribbon, the pilgrimage color. She walked as far as the shrine at Milford before the border closed. She let her hand fall. She never told me where exactly. I have been touching every green ribbon since the first shrine." He said quietly, "When you find the right one, you will know." She turned to look at him. He meant it plainly, not sentimentally, and she could see that, and something in her expression shifted, softened, in the particular way of someone who is not used to being understood simply and unexpectedly is. She said, "You are a strange man, Clyde Crawford." He said, "I have been called worse." She walked again, and he walked with her. They stopped at midday at a Pilgrim Way shelter, a 3-sided stone structure with a fire ring and a water barrel maintained by the commission, and Clyde made hot broth from his trail kit, and they sat across from each other in the smoke-smelling shelter while the fire snapped between them. He looked at her in the firelight. She was something. The amber eyes, the strong jaw, the careful way she held herself even sitting still, like a blade not quite sheathed. She was eating with a direct, unself-conscious appetite that he found honestly refreshing after years of watching sick people push food around the edges of a bowl. He said, "Tell me about the Ironblood name. Where does it come from?" She said, "Old Orcish. It translates more precisely as blood that will not stop. It was given to my grandfather's line after a battle at the Red Ford 3 generations ago, where he held a river crossing for 2 days without retreat." She ate. It is meant to imply tenacity rather than violence. The humans who hear it tend to hear the second word more than the first. "And your mother, was she a fighter?" "She was a speaker. She negotiated the third clause of the peace treaty, the one about shared shrine roads, the one that let orcs and humans use the Verath road without paying crossing fees." A pause. "She fought once at Grafen when there was no alternative. She was not a fighter by preference. She preferred rooms full of people who disagreed and needed to be brought to an agreement." "That sounds harder than fighting." "It is," Ugak said. "She was better at it than anyone I have known." He said, "She sounds remarkable." Ugak looked into the fire. "She died 3 years ago. Illness. Nothing dramatic. She would have hated that. She would have wanted it to be more notable." A faint and genuine sadness in her voice. She would have wanted to reach the final shrine. "I am doing it because she could not." He looked at her across the fire and felt something open in his chest, not pity, which he was careful not to let it be, but recognition, the specific ache of knowing what it was to carry something for someone who could no longer carry it themselves. He said, "My father built roads, garrison roads maintenance contract. He spent 30 years on the Verath road repair crews." He stopped. "He died on this road, fell from a bridge repair scaffold 6 years ago. I became the road surgeon partly because this road was already where I always ended up." She looked up from the fire. She looked at him with a directness that was very specific, the look of someone who has just received a piece of information that matters. She said, "That is why you know every Wayhouse commander." "And every fee schedule," he said, "and every patrol schedule, and every bad stretch of road between here and the first shrine." He turned his cup in his hands. "I know this road. I know it better than anywhere else. It is the closest thing I have to a place." She said, "I know what it is to have a road instead of a place." "I believe you." A silence. The fire snapped. Outside, the wind moved through the pilgrim ribbons in the hedgerow, and somewhere ahead of them on the road, 20 miles east, the final shrine of Asheville was waiting in its valley, and somewhere behind them, Hurst was riding hard toward Thornwall. She said, "Crawford." He said, "Clyde." She looked at him. "Clyde." The men from the tree line were not independent contractors in the usual sense. I recognized the one with the scar on his chin. "He rode with a commander named Dorvin who runs operations for Fenwick's unofficial interest in the Orc territory east of Greymount." He stilled. "That is not a good name." "No, Dorvin does not take a failed assignment quietly." "And if Hurst is riding to Thornwall to speak to someone, it is likely Dorvin." She looked at the fire. "The new warrant will not be a fine. It will be a full arrest order. That changes what is possible at a Wayhouse gate." He thought about this. "How long do we have?" "A fast rider from Thornwall to any of the Eastern Road checkpoints, perhaps 10 hours. We are 4 hours from Asheville." She paused. "But there is another route, a shrine path that cuts north of the main road and comes in through the valley. It is slower and rougher, but it bypasses the eastern checkpoints." "How do you know the shrine path?" she said quietly. "My mother's maps." She drew them herself, the whole road from first shrine to last. "She gave them to me before she died." A pause. "She knew she would never finish. She gave me what she had." He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Take me on the shrine path." She looked at him. He looked back steady. She said, "It will add 4 hours." "I have been on this road for 4 years," he said. "I can do 4 more hours." Something moved through her face, something warm and quick, there and gone. She said, "All right." They broke camp, stamped out the fire, and went. The shrine path was not a road. It was a track, in some places barely a track. An old way, older than the garrison posts, older than the border treaties, older probably than the border itself. It wound north into the oak-covered hills and along ridge lines where the air was cold and thin and smelled of pine resin. And the shrines here were older too, cruder carved, the pilgrim ribbons so old they were colorless. Ugak walked with her eyes moving steadily over the path and the surrounding terrain, and occasionally she would touch a marker stone or pause at a fork and consult the internal map that her mother's drawings had given her. And Clyde followed and watched her and thought about how she moved, the absolute groundedness of it, the way her feet found the path without hesitation, the way the hill country seemed to open for her rather than resist her. After an hour on the shrine path, she said, "At Grayfen. I want to tell you what happened since you know the shortened version." He said, "Tell me," she said. The delegation had been meeting for 9 days, human commissioners and Orc clan speakers. My mother was one of the Orc speakers. The agreement was nearly done. The third clause was the last holdout, the shrine roads. It was my mother's specific work. She walked and talked, the way people tell the truest things, looking ahead rather than at the person beside them. A faction of the border garrison came in the night. Not a large group, 6 men, armed under no official order that we ever found evidence of. They intended to disrupt the delegation, to take prisoners, to make the treaty impossible. He said, "Dorvin," she glanced at him. "Before Dorvin was his second. His name was Urk. He is dead now." A pause. "He died at Grayfen. Because of you." Because he stepped in front of his own crossbow bolt when someone hit him from the side. Her voice was entirely factual. "I held the pass because the delegation needed the road behind them. The path out was 3 hours of dark valley. I needed to give them 3 hours. She was quiet for a moment. I held it. They reached safety. My mother signed the treaty with the third clause intact at dawn the next day." He said, "And Dorvin. Dorvin survived. He blamed my mother for his commander's death. He blamed the Ironblood name for the treaty that cost him his position." She looked at the shrine path ahead. "He has been in Fenwick's unofficial employ since the treaty was ratified. He has spent 3 years looking for a way to unravel the third clause. An Ironblood on a charge of treaty violation, even a trivial one, would be the pretext he needs to reopen the clause negotiations with the Orc clans." The full picture settled on Clyde with the specific clarity of a diagnosis. "He is not trying to imprison you. He is trying to use you." "Yes. And if you were in his cell block, I would not remain in his cell block," she said, and her voice was absolutely even. "I told the garrison men when they put the chain on me that I would break any chain they put on me. That was not bravado. It was a statement of fact." He said, "I believe you." She looked at him, and there was something in her eyes that he had not seen there before, not vulnerability exactly, but an openness, a crack in the careful armor, the look of someone who has been believed and does not know what to do with it because it has not happened often enough. She said, "I have been alone on this road since Greymount. 3 days in chains. Before that, 3 weeks of travel alone. My clan is east of the border, far east, far from the current politics. I did not want to bring this trouble to them by going home." She looked away. "This was supposed to be a quiet thing, a private thing." He said gently, "Most private things are not quiet on the Verath road." She said no, and then after a moment, "I am glad you were there." He said, "So am I." They looked at each other on the old shrine path, among the ancient carved stones and the colorless ribbons in the cold, clear hill air, and something shifted between them that was not exactly new but was being named for the first time. He felt it as a warmth in his chest and a clarity in his thoughts, the specific rightness of standing in the right place beside the right person. Then she said, "There is someone following us," and the moment reorganized itself. He did not turn. He said, "How many?" "One, light step, moving parallel in the trees to the north. 60 feet, maybe 70, he thought. One tracker, which meant the tree-line ambushers had had an observer, or Dorvin's network was tighter than they thought, or Hurst had sent one of his 2 remaining men ahead while the garrison captain rode to Thornwall. He said, "Can we outpace them? On this path with a heavy kit?" "No," she considered. "But there is a shrine shelter 200 yards ahead at a path junction. If we can reach it, I can hold the junction while you cross the open ground east to the Valley Road. The Valley Road connects to Asheville's North Gate." He said, "I am not leaving you at a path junction." She said, "Crawford, Clyde." "Clyde." She said his name with the careful deliberateness of someone who does not use names lightly. "I can handle 1 tracker." Handling one tracker in a way that creates more problems when Dorvin arrives is not handling one tracker, he said. And the way you look right now, you are thinking about more than handling. She was quiet. He was right and she knew it. He said, both of us together to the shrine shelter. We wait. If the tracker comes to the shelter, it is a public shrine point that carries its own protections under the treaty. If they do not come to the shelter, we move on after dark, she said. You know a great deal of treaty law for a surgeon. Father built garrison roads, he said. The treaty was the thing that made his work possible. He read me the articles the way some fathers read stories. A pause, she said. All right, together. They moved quickly and quietly to the shrine shelter, older and rougher than the commission-maintained ones, a stone hollow built into the hillside with a carved lintel above the entrance. They pressed themselves inside, and Ugak watched the tree line from the shadow of the doorway while Clyde kept still and quiet at her back. The tracker appeared at the edge of the trees. He was one of Hurst's garrison men, not a hard professional, just a soldier doing as he was told. He stood at the tree line looking at the shrine shelter for a long time. Then he looked at the carved lintel above the door. Then he stepped back into the trees. Ugak waited. Then she said, he is gone. Clyde let out a slow breath. Treaty shrine protections, he knew. Some of them still respect it, she said, and there was something careful and not quite hopeful in her voice, the tone of someone who has been surprised by decency too rarely. They stayed in the shelter as the light thinned toward late afternoon, sitting close in the narrow stone space, and the warmth of her was very present beside him, and at some point her shoulder was resting against his and neither of them moved away from it. He said quietly, tell me about your clan. The ones far east, she said quietly back, small now. My grandfather's line was the largest in the eastern range, but the wars took most of the fighters and the treaty politics took most of the leaders. My uncle leads what is left. He is a good man. He is old and tired and he wants the treaty to hold. A pause. They do not need an Ironblood causing trouble near the border. They need the shrine roads to stay open and the tariffs to stay manageable. He said, is that why you came alone? Partly, and partly because she stopped, reconsidered. The pilgrimage is mine, not the clan's, not my mother's legacy in any official sense. Mine, a pause. She left it unfinished. I wanted to finish it as myself, not as a representative. He said, that makes sense. She said, you say that a lot, that things make sense. He said, most things do if you look at them right. She turned slightly to look at him and they were very close and the last of the light was coming gold through the shrine shelter entrance and falling across her face and he was very aware of how near she was. She said, Clyde. He said, yes, she said. What are you doing on this road? He said, right now, hiding in a shrine shelter with you. She said, no, what are you doing on this road in the larger sense? You have been here for 4 years. You are good at this work and you know this territory better than the garrison does. You could have a place somewhere, a town, a practice. He considered, he said, I tried a town, it was quiet, he paused. Not peaceful quiet, just empty. The kind of quiet that lets you hear everything you are missing. He looked at the carved stone of the shelter wall. The road is never empty. There is always something happening, someone who needs something, a new stretch I have not walked before. He looked at his hands. It is not a life that most people would choose, she said. It is not unlike mine. He looked at her. She was watching him with those amber eyes, steady and warm, and the gold light was in them, and she said, my clan is there if I want them. But I have spent 2 years moving between the border territories, doing what needed doing. A road war leader with no war to lead, they called me, which was unkind but not untrue. A pause. I did not know what I was looking for, he said, and now, she held his gaze, she said, I am beginning to think I was looking for the right road. He felt the warmth spread through his chest and into his hands. He said carefully, because he was not a man given to saying things he did not mean, I have been on this road alone for 4 years. I did not know that was a problem until 2 days ago. She looked at him with something that was open and unguarded and completely itself, and she reached up with one hand and touched his jaw, just her fingertips, light and deliberate, the way she had touched the pilgrim ribbon at the shrine marker, and he turned his face toward her touch and closed the small remaining distance between them and kissed her. It was not a tentative kiss. She was not a tentative person. She kissed him back with the directness and warmth of someone who had decided and was acting on the decision, one hand coming up to the back of his neck, and he brought his hands up and held her face, and the shrine shelter was very warm and the gold light was still coming through the entrance, and it felt, in the specific way of things that are absolutely right, like arriving somewhere. When they separated, he kept his hands on her face and she kept hers at the back of his neck, and they looked at each other in the light. She said, "I did not plan that." He said, "Neither did I," she said. "I am not a person who does things without planning. Neither am I." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she made that sound again, the almost laugh that was increasingly becoming an actual laugh, and he smiled at her, and she pressed her forehead briefly to his and then straightened. She said, "We need to move. The valley road will be dark in 2 hours." He said, "Right." They moved. The valley road came down out of the hills onto a broad, flat shelf of land that ran between forested ridges and ended 4 miles east at the Asheville Shrine encampment. It was pilgrim country proper here. The road was better maintained. The shrine markers were freshly kept, and even in the late-day dimness there were other travelers. Small groups of pilgrims in gray cloaks, a merchant cart, 2 orc traders with a pack mule who passed them with a nod that Ugak returned with the specific formal tilt of the head that Clyde had learned from 4 years on this road, was an orcish acknowledgement of shared purpose. They walked quickly, side by side, and she kept her hand near his arm, not touching but close, and he was aware of every inch of that near contact in a way that made concentrating on the road require more effort than usual. He said, "When we reach Asheville, the shrine encampment is large, commission run. I have a registered spot there as road surgeon. That gives us some protection from Dorvin's warrant if it comes." She said, "How much protection?" "Enough to require him to go through the commission's senior officer rather than walking in with garrison soldiers. The commission is not Fenwick aligned. They are independent charter." He paused. "Buying us time at minimum," she said, "and beyond time." He had been thinking about this since the shrine shelter. He said, "The Ironblood name, your grandfather's treaty work, your mother's 3rd clause." He paused. "Does anyone in Asheville know who you are?" She said, "I do not make a habit of announcing myself." "What if you did?" A silence. He could feel her thinking it. He said, "The peace treaty's 3rd clause covers shrine road access. It was your mother's specific contribution. If you arrive at the Asheville final shrine as an Ironblood completing your mother's pilgrimage under shrine road protections publicly with commission witnesses, then any arrest attempt by Dorvin becomes not a garrison matter but a treaty violation in real time in front of witnesses on sacred ground." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "You are describing using the treaty to protect itself." "Yes," he said. "Is that too strange?" She said, "It is exactly the kind of thing my mother would have done." He said, "Then let's do it." It took them until full dark to reach the Asheville encampment, which sprawled across a wide valley floor in the shadow of the mountain that held the final shrine. Dozens of fire-lit tents and commission-run shelters, the smell of cook fires and pine smoke, the sound of evening prayers in both human and orc cadences rising and mixing, and going up together into the cold, clear night. Clyde found the commission office and registered his arrival and his patient old brother Vark, the priest with the chest infection, who was sitting up in his commission tent and looking moderately better than the last report Clyde had received. He checked Vark thoroughly, adjusted his medicine routine, and left him comfortable. Then he went back to the edge of the encampment where Ugak had waited, and she was standing in the dark outside the firelight, looking at the mountain where the final shrine was, with an expression he recognized as the look of someone very close to something they have been carrying for a long time. He came to stand beside her. He said, "Tomorrow morning." "First light, we go up together," she said. "The commission witnesses. I have already spoken to the senior officer, a woman named Talon. She knows the treaty. She knows the Ironblood name. She will be there." He paused. She cried a little when I told her I think she knew your mother. Ugak turned to look at him. Her voice was not entirely steady when she said, "You arranged all of this in the last hour." He said, "I am a surgeon. I assess the situation and I act before the problem gets worse." She looked at him with those amber eyes full of firelight and something he could not exactly name except that it felt enormous and warm and completely steady, and she said, "No one has ever," and then stopped. He said, "What?" She said, "No one has ever organized things on my behalf. I have always been the one organizing." He said gently, "Let someone do it once." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she stepped forward and took his face in her hands, and she kissed him with a warmth and intensity that made the earlier kiss feel like an introduction. And he held her and kissed her back and felt the cold mountain air around them and the encampment firelight below, and did not feel alone in a way that was physical, bone-deep, and entirely new. They stood in the dark outside the encampment and held on to each other, and she pressed her face briefly into the side of his head, and he felt her exhale a long, releasing breath, the kind that carries something down with it. She said, very quietly into his hair, "I am going to complete it." He said into her shoulder, "I know." He found a commission tent for them, 2 pallets, pilgrimage regulation, and they lay close in the dark and talked quietly until sleep came for them both, her voice low in the darkness telling him small things. The Eastern clan's winter camp, the sound of her grandfather's war drum kept in her uncle's tent, the color of the high-range autumn. He told her small things back, the names of every wayhouse on the Verath road, the specific smell of pine resin in the hollow mile in summer, the first time he had walked the road and been completely terrified and completely certain at the same time. She said, in the dark, "You said you knew this road better than anywhere else." He said, "Yes." She said, "I think I have been on the wrong roads." He turned toward her. She turned toward him. He kissed her temple and she tucked herself against him with the settled ease of someone who has been cold for a long time and found heat, and he put his arm around her and did not let go. They slept. He woke before dawn to the sound of voices outside the tent, not alarmed voices, but businesslike and official, which was sometimes worse. He was on his feet and at the tent flap in seconds. Commission Officer Talon was there, a sharp-faced woman in her 50s with gray at her temples and the alert eyes of a career road administrator. Behind her were 2 of her commission officers. And behind them on the encampment's west approach road were 5 mounted men in the black and yellow of Fenwick's garrison. Not Hurst, someone else, someone harder. Clyde looked at the lead rider and recognized the type, not a field captain but an enforcer, the kind of man sent when Hurst had failed and Dorving needed results. The enforcer said to Talon, "Commission Officer, we are here under a warrant issued by Lord Fenwick's justice seat at Thornwall. It authorizes the detention of an Orc national known as Ugak Ironblood on charges of treaty violation and interference with garrison operations." Talon said, in a voice that had clearly seen worse than this, "Show me the warrant." Ugak was at Clyde's shoulder. She had heard. She was looking at the enforcer with the absolute stillness that he was coming to understand meant she was calculating everything at once. She said very quietly, "Treaty violation. That is the new charge. That is Dorving. He is reframing the original arrest." Clyde said, "Talon is reading the warrant carefully. She is looking for the clause registration." Ugak said, "The warrant has to specify which treaty clause was violated." Clyde said, "And any violation of the Shrine Road Access Clause, the 3rd clause, has to be adjudicated by the Commission, not the garrison." Talon had finished reading the warrant. She said to the enforcer, "The charge as filed cites interference with garrison operations. That is not a treaty violation by any existing clause. A treaty violation requires a specific clause reference, which this document does not contain." She handed the warrant back. "Additionally, this encampment is a registered commission pilgrimage site. Commission Charter Article 12 prohibits garrison arrest of registered pilgrims on active pilgrimage ground without commission co-signature, which I am not providing." The enforcer said, "The commission does not supersede Fenwick's." "The commission supersedes Fenwick's authority on this ground," Talon said, with the pleasant certainty of a woman who had spent 30 years studying exactly what she could and could not do. "The encampment is registered under the Joint Pilgrimage Charter, which predates Fenwick's tenure and his lord's seal by approximately 90 years. She let that rest. You may remain outside the encampment boundary while I send a formal notification to the Commission's legal office in Pharaoh's Crossing. The notification will take 4 days to process. During that period, active pilgrims on this ground are under Commission protection. 4 days." The enforcer looked at Talon. He looked at Clyde, who met the look steadily. He looked at Ugak, who met the look the same way, with her feet planted and her chin level and the absolute bedrock assurance of a woman who knew exactly what she was standing on. The enforcer pulled his horse to the side and said something in a low voice to the rider beside him. Talon turned to Clyde and Ugak and said briskly, "You have a sunrise appointment at the final shrine. I suggest you use the next 2 hours." Clyde looked at Ugak. She looked at him. He said, "Let's go." The path to the final shrine climbed for 2 miles up the mountain's south face, along a carved stone way that had been walked for generations, the surface worn smooth and shining in the first gray light. They went with Talon and 2 commission witnesses behind them as formal escort, and the silence on the mountain was the particular silence of high places in early morning, dense, clear, complete. Ugak walked ahead of him. He walked behind her and slightly to the right, close enough that she could hear him breathe. He watched her climb and thought about everything that had happened in 5 days. The chain on the Verath road, the Wayhouse gate, the hollow mile, the shrine shelter, the dark valley under the mountain, and it felt both very long and very short, the way significant time always does. She stopped at the final shrine. It was a carved stone figure at the crest of the mountain path, taller than anything on the lower road, weathered and ancient and deeply present. Before it was a long curved ledge of stone covered in pilgrim offerings, ribbons, small carved tokens, folded papers, cloth bundles. The first light was just cresting the eastern ridgeline, making the stone glow amber. There were green ribbons on the ledge, many of them from many pilgrimages from many years. Ugak stood in front of the shrine and looked at it. She reached into the front pocket of her traveling vest and took out a folded length of dark green ribbon. Old silk, slightly frayed, something kept safe for a long time, handled carefully. She tied it to the shrine's clasped stone hands. She tied it with the specific knot that Clyde recognized from 4 years on the Verath road, as the Orc pilgrim's completion knot, a long loop knot that meant the road is walked and I carry it now. Her hands were steady. She did not look away from the shrine while she knotted it. She said quietly in Orcish, and Clyde did not know the words but knew what they were, something brief and complete and private, the thing you say to a person who cannot hear you but needs to be told. Then she was still. He came to stand beside her. He did not speak. He looked at the green ribbon against the old stone and the first amber light on the mountain and listened to the wind and felt the specific weight of the moment settling. She said, after a long time, "She is here." He said, "Yes." She said, "I can feel it." He said, "I know." She turned to him. Her amber eyes were bright and wet at the corners and entirely unashamed, the clear-eyed grief of someone who has earned the right to cry in the open. He opened his arms without any calculation about whether it was the right thing, because it was plainly the right thing, and she came into them and held on, and he held her back on the top of the mountain in the first light. He pressed his face into her hair and felt her breathe and felt the mountain under their feet and the whole long road behind them and did not feel anywhere other than exactly where he was. She said into his shoulder, "I told you." He said, "You did." She said, "I told them I would break any chain they put on me." He said, "I know." She pulled back slightly and looked at him. She said, "And you said you would never put one on." He said, "I meant it." She said, "I know you did. That is the thing." She held his face in her hands. "That is the specific thing. I have spent 2 years moving between borders, and I have been told what I was and what I was not and what I was capable of and what I owed, and no one," her voice was steady but very close to something real and total beneath it. "No one said I could move freely, not like that, not like they meant it." He said, "You can, you always could, I just said it out loud." She looked at him for a long time. Then she kissed him, high on the mountain in the new light, with the commission witnesses standing at a respectful distance down the path, and the green ribbon behind her moving in the wind, and the whole Verath road below them in the morning. When they came down the mountain, the garrison enforcers were still at the encampment's west approach. There were more of them now, not 5 but 12, and the enforcer had been replaced by someone older and harder, a man in a dark coat over the garrison blackened yellow, with the kind of face that has stopped registering the feelings of other people. Dorvin himself. Clyde knew him by description: the heavy-set jaw, the close-cropped gray hair, the specific way he sat a horse like a man who expects the landscape to accommodate him. He was speaking to Talon, who was speaking back to him with the patient expression of a woman who has had this exact conversation before and knows all the exits. Dorvin saw Ugak come down the path, and his eyes settled on her the way a certain kind of man's eyes settle, not attraction but acquisition, the look of a person looking at a problem they have been trying to solve for a long time and now see in reach. He said, loudly enough for the encampment to hear, "Ugak Ironblood. Under Lord Fenwick's authority and treaty enforcement powers granted by the border compacts, you are ordered to present yourself to this garrison detail for processing on charges of." Ugak walked forward. Clyde walked beside her, step for step. She said, "Name the clause." Dorvin said, "Article 14 of the Article 14 governs Orc military assembly within the border corridor," Ugak said, without slowing her pace. "I am a single individual on a pilgrimage road. Military assembly requires a minimum of 20 armed persons. You may note I have no weapons beyond a belt knife, which is permitted under the treaty's personal carry provisions." She stopped in front of him, not a long way below him on his horse, but close enough that she was looking up at him from 2 feet and he was looking down at her from his saddle, and the height advantage was clearly making him feel better than it should, because she was very still and very precise and not the least bit impressed. "Name the correct clause," Dorvin said. "The Commission's protection does not extend to—" "I completed my pilgrimage this morning," Ugak said. "Commission officer Talon has the witness record. I am now a completed pilgrim on pilgrimage return. The Commission's return journey protections apply for a period of 3 days from completion." She held up 3 fingers. 3 days, during which time I am under joint commission and treaty protection, and you require a co-signed warrant from the Commission's legal office and the Orc clan speaker's representative to effect any detention. Dorvin stared at her. His horse shifted. He steadied it without looking at it, keeping his eyes on her. He said, "You cannot hide behind your mother's clause forever." She said, "My mother wrote that clause so that no Orc pilgrim would ever be stopped on this road again." She completed that work the morning after she held a delegation safe through a night when 6 of your predecessor's men tried to kill them. Her voice was entirely level. "She wrote it for everyone who would walk this road after her, including me." A pause. "You can argue with her clause in the Commission legal office. I will be there in 4 days. Bring your documentation." She walked past him. Clyde walked beside her, and he felt 12 garrison sets of eyes on his back and did not break stride, and Talon caught his eye as they passed and gave him the fractional nod of a woman who has just witnessed something she is going to be telling people about for the rest of her career. They walked through the encampment to the eastern exit, and no one stopped them. On the east road in the morning light, Ugak finally let out a long breath. She looked at the sky. She rolled her shoulders. Then she looked at Clyde. She said, "I did not expect him to come himself." He said, "You handled it." She said, "He will come back. 4 days, legal office challenge. He has the resources and the motivation." Clyde said, "Then we go to the legal office first." She said, "We." He said, "You need a witness. someone who was on the road from Redhill who can attest to the original warrant circumstances. Someone who watched the chain go on and watched it come off and watched you complete a pilgrimage without weapons and without incident. She said, "That is you." He said, "That is me." She looked at him for a long time, and the morning light was on her, and the green ribbon from the final shrine was somewhere behind them up the mountain, and the whole Verath road stretched west and home, and she said, "You came to this road to be a surgeon." He said, "I came to this road because I did not know what else I was looking for." She said, "And now," he said, "now I know." She crossed the distance between them and kissed him, there on the east road in the plain morning light, not gently. She kissed him the way she did everything, with the directness and completeness of a woman who has decided, and Clyde Crawford, who had been alone on this road for 4 years and had not known he was lonely until 5 days ago, kissed her back with everything he had. They walked the road to Pharaoh's Crossing together, west in the morning sun, and she told him about the east and her uncle's winter camp and the sound of the clan drums in cold air. And he told her about the Wayhouse network, every post, every face, every fee schedule, the specific knowledge of 4 years of walking. And somewhere around the third shrine she moved her arm against his, and he took her hand and they walked like that, hand in hand on the old Verath road. Under the carved stone eyes of the pilgrim figures and the faded ribbons and the open sky. At the Milford Shrine, the one where her mother had stopped, the last shrine before the final approach, they paused. Ugak looked at the shrine markers, the long curve of ribbons in the hedgerow. She moved along them slowly, reading them the way she had been reading every green ribbon from the first shrine on. And then she stopped. She reached out with 2 fingers, the same careful touch as before, and touched a faded green ribbon that had been there long enough to have gone almost gray at the edges. She held it between her fingers and was very still. She said, very quietly, "This one." He stopped beside her and did not speak. She said, "This is hers. I know the knot, it is her knot, the one she taught me." Her fingers traced it. She made it this far, she stood here, a pause. She stood exactly here. He stood beside her and felt the weight of it, not as a bystander but as someone inside the moment, the way you are inside a moment when you are standing with the person it belongs to. He put his hand on her back, gentle and there, and she leaned into it just slightly. She said, "She almost made it." He said, "You made it for her." She said, "Yes," a long breath. "I did." She took out the small folded piece of green ribbon she had kept in her pocket, a spare she had brought, and tied it beside her mother's, knot to knot, the new beside the old. Her hands were steady. She said, "2 now." He said, "2." She turned to him and she was not crying, but she looked clean, the way a person looks when they have put something down after carrying it for a long time. She looked at him with those amber eyes full of morning light and said, "You are going to walk this road again." He said, "Yes," she said, "I want to walk it with you." He said, "That is exactly what I was about to ask." She said, "I know," and there was a warmth in her voice like the warmth of a fire you have come in from the cold to. And she pulled him in by his coat lapels and kissed him there at the Milford Shrine, in front of the faded pilgrim ribbons and the carved stone saints. And he held her and she held him, and the road ran on ahead of them, clear and full and entirely open. They reached Pharaoh's Crossing on the 3rd day. The Verath Road Commission office was a stone building on the main square of Pharaoh's Crossing, staffed by a team of clerks and 2 senior officers under the commission charter. The legal office was on the upper floor, and it was staffed by a single clerk named Petrin who wore reading spectacles and had the careful, unhurried manner of someone who genuinely loved paperwork. Clyde presented himself as witness to the original Redhill detention. He presented Commander Breck's signed release form, which he had kept in his kit folio. He presented his commission contract, which covered the full period of the events. He presented his own written account, which he had composed on the 2nd day's walk, and which was detailed, chronologically precise, and careful to name Hurst, the enforcer, and Dorvin by full description. Ugak presented her completed pilgrimage record, Talon's witness document from Asheville, and her own account, which was brief and entirely factual, and the more devastating for it. Petrin read everything slowly and carefully. He refiled his spectacles twice. He said, "The original warrant was a fine resolution matter that was properly discharged at Redhill." He said, "The subsequent warrant cites treaty violation under Article 14, which on its face does not apply to a single individual on a pilgrimage road." He said, "The attempt to arrest a registered active pilgrim on commission pilgrimage ground without co-signature is a clear charter violation." He looked over his spectacles at Clyde and Ugak across his desk. "This is a strong file," Clyde said. "Will it hold against Dorvin's challenge?" Petrin said. "It will require a joint review board commission, treaty office, and a border garrison commander of equal or greater rank than Fenwick's authority. That review board is not in Dorvin's control." He paused. "It will take time, but yes, it will hold," Ugak said. "And the third clause, the Shrine Road access." Petrin said, "The file as presented, with the Ironblood name attached to the pilgrimage completion record, makes any challenge to the third clause significantly more difficult. A challenge would have to argue that the clause should not apply to the very family that negotiated it." He folded his spectacles. "Courts do not like that argument. It tends to go poorly." Ugak said quietly, "Good." Petrin filed the documents. He stamped them with the commission seal. He handed Ugak the copy. She held it for a moment. Clyde watched her hold it and looked at her face. The quiet, solid satisfaction there. The thing you see in a person when something they have carried for a long time has been set down in a place that will actually hold it. She said to Petrin, "Who should I notify in the Orc clan territories?" Petrin said, "The Border Clan Speaker's office will receive an automatic copy. There is a representative in the Eastern Territories, a man named Garveth in the township of Ashen." Ugak said, "I know Garveth." Petrin said, "Good. He will want to see this." They left the legal office in the late afternoon and came out into the main square of Pharaoh's Crossing, which was busy with market day stalls and carts and voices in several languages. Human traders and orc merchants and road pilgrims and wayhouse workers, the whole complicated living commerce of a border town. Clyde stood in the square and looked at Ugak and said, "Are you all right?" She stood in the late light with the commission document in her hand and looked at the square and at the road running east toward the Verath Way and the shrines. She said, "I am better than all right." A pause. "I am not sure I have been better than all right in quite some time." He said, "Good." She looked at him. She said, "What now?" He said, "I have supply pickups to do at the North Way House. A patient at the Grafen Crossing I promised to check on. A long stretch of the West Road that I have not covered since spring." He paused. "I am going to be on this road for a while," she said. "Is that an invitation?" He said, "It is if you want it to be." She tucked the document into her vest pocket and looked at him with her amber eyes warm and level and said, "I need to go east. Send a message to my uncle. Tell him about Dorvin's challenge and the commission file. Make sure Garveth has what he needs." She paused. "That is 2 weeks, maybe 3, there and back." He said, "I can meet you at Redhill Way House 3 weeks from today." She looked at him for a long moment. She said, "You trust that I will be there?" He said, "I trust that you will be there." She said, "I told you, I am not a person who does things without planning." He said, "I know." She said, "I plan to be at Redhill Way House in 3 weeks." He said, "Then I will be there." She came to him in the square in front of everyone and kissed him with a directness and openness that made 3 market stall operators stare and 1 orc trader at a nearby stall smile broadly and say something in Orcish that sounded approving. Clyde did not know the words, but he knew the tone. He held her face and kissed her back and felt the square around them and the road beyond it and did not pull back until she did. She said against his mouth, 3 weeks. He said, 3 weeks. She stepped back. She looked at him once more, the whole look, the amber eyes moving over him with the same measuring warmth they had held since the first time on the garrison road, the assessment of someone who has found what they were looking for and is making absolutely sure they have it right. She said, "Clyde Crawford." He said, "Ugak Ironblood," she said. "I will not be late." He said, "I know." She turned and walked east from Pharaoh's Crossing Square, her stride long and ground-eating, her dark leathers moving in the afternoon light. And she did not look back, not because she was leaving, but because she was already going, which was entirely different. He watched her until she reached the road's first turning and took it. He stood in the square for another moment. Then he picked up his kit, settled it on his shoulder, and turned west. He had a patient at Grafin Crossing. He had a supply run at the North Way House. He had 23 miles of West Road to cover before the week was out, and 3 weeks of the Verath Road after that before he reached Redhill. It was a full road. It had always been a full road. But it felt different now, the way things feel different when you know someone is on the other side of the distance. He walked. The Verath Road ran on ahead of him, wide and churned and familiar, the shrine markers at their intervals, the pilgrim ribbons in the hedgerows, the old carved stone saints watching the road with their hollow eyes, and the sky above it all clear and open and entirely without chains. 3 weeks later, Clyde Crawford came into Redhill Wayhouse courtyard at midday with a lighter pack, a full kit, and 3 new stitching cases from the West Road that had not killed him. He came in through the main gate and stopped. Ugak Ironblood was already there. She was sitting on the low stone wall at the center of the courtyard with her back straight and her bracers on and her traveling leathers straight, and she was reading a folded document with the focused attention of someone reviewing important work. She had not seen him come in. He stood at the gate and looked at her. She turned a page. She was entirely self-contained and entirely herself. The same woman from the Garrison Road, the Shrine Path, the mountain summit, the legal office desk, the Pharaoh's Crossing Square, exactly herself, with no modification for his presence because she had not noticed it yet. He liked that. He liked it very much. He walked across the courtyard and came to the wall. She looked up. Her face when she saw him did something. It was quick and involuntary and entirely real, the open flash of warmth that a person shows before they have time to arrange their expression, the thing they show when someone arrives that they wanted to arrive. She said, "You are 2 hours early." He said, "I walked fast." She looked at him for a moment and then she set the document down and stood up from the wall, and she was tall and strong and entirely present. And she looked at him with her amber eyes warm and direct and said, "I have been here since this morning." He said, "You said you would not be late." She said, "I was not late, I was early. That is different." He said, "It is." She said, "My uncle sends his regards. Garveth has the commission file. The clan speaker's office has sent a formal notification to the commission treaty office in Pharaoh's Crossing." She paused. "Dorvin's challenge is already on shaky ground. The review board has been set and it does not include anyone in Fenwick's pay." He said, "Good." She said, "Good." And then she stepped close and took his face in her hands, the way she had in the shrine shelter, the way she did, the specific warmth and directness of it, and he covered her hands with his and looked at her. He said, "The West Road is longer than I remembered." She said, "The East Road is faster on a good horse." He said, "I do not have a horse." She said, "I have 2. He looked at her. She looked back at him with that barely there warmth at the corner of her mouth, that controlled brightness in the amber eyes, and he said, "You planned ahead." She said, "I told you I do not do things without planning." He said, "Ugak." She said, "Yes." He said, "I want to stay on this road with you." She said, "I know." He said, "Not as something temporary." Not as, she said, "I know what you mean." He said, "I am not asking you to stop moving. I know you move. I know this road is," she said, "Clyde." She looked at him very directly. "I told you on the mountain what I was looking for." He said, "The right road." She said, "You are the right road." He felt the warmth of it move through him, solid and sure and completely present, and he leaned his forehead against hers and she held his face and he held her wrists and neither of them moved. She said quietly against his forehead, "In my clan, when you claim a companion for the long road, you say a word, a single word. It means I carry your distance." He said, "Tell me the word." She said the word, low and clear in Orcish, a word that sounded like stone and like water at the same time, ancient and complete. He said it back. He said it carefully and fully, exactly as she had said it, and she pulled back slightly to look at him, and her eyes were bright, and the smile was fully there now, real and unreserved, the first time he had seen it completely. He said, "Was that right?" she said. "That was exactly right." He said, "Then let's go." They walked out of Red Hill Way House together into the afternoon light, and the Verath road ran ahead of them between its shrines and its hedgerows and its old worn stones, and the horses went at an easy pace, and the road was long, and neither of them was alone. The commission document was filed. The review board would meet. Dorvin would be seen for what he was in the plain language of charter law and treaty text, and the third clause would hold, and the shrine road would stay open, and pilgrims of both races would walk it as they always had, as the treaty said they should, as an old woman's ribbon tied at a wayhouse shrine had always promised they would. The road went on. They went with it. He reached across between the horses, and she took his hand, and the shrine ribbons moved in the wind, and the carved stone saints watched them pass with their hollow eyes, and the sky above the Verath road was open and blue and entirely without chains.